The people issues were big. Sure, were big. Imagine you have worked at this power station all your life, your working life, and you know in 2 years' time you'll be out of a job. So I think the morale was
It's down.
deep. Yeah.
Yeah, in the supply chain, somewhere there's corruption.
remember
in
now?
the coal.
Yeah, please explain. What were they saying now?
Is the medicine of censorship. This is the pill. Which one is that one? Podcast and chill.
First day at the job there at Eskom, what was it like? Like, what intel did you get?
Well, my first was not to go to the head office, but to go to the power station where the action is. And I must say that, and I generated the report out of my experience having gone to the 14 power station. The people issues were big. Sure, were big in the following sense. There were power stations that were meant to be closed. I mean, I went to one Camden. I think 1 or 2 units were meant to be closed. I think 2 days from the time that I had visited. So what that tells, and then they knew that 2026, one of the power stations will be closed. So imagine you have worked at this power station all your life, your working life, and you know in 2 years' time you'll be out of a job. So I think the morale was
down.
deep. Yeah. And then the other one was that we are just painted with the same brush. Everyone says we're stealing. We are incompetent. We just don't know what we are doing because of load shedding. And then the third one was as a result of Eskom's underperformance, the deteriorating balance sheet, they were not getting the kind of incentives that they are used to. So they had not gotten any improvement on their salaries, as they put it to me, over a period of 3 years. So the morale was very, very low. So there is no incentive, even if you can see the unit is at risk of failing. So what?
Good afternoon. Eskom is often described as a technical, financial or governance crisis. Our argument is more precise. Eskom is a leadership failure expressed through technical breakdowns, financial strain and cultural collapse. That framing matters because Eskom is a system-critical public utility. When Eskom underperforms, the effects do not remain inside the organization. They spill directly into households, hospitals, schools, mines, factories and the wider economy. The 2024 financial year picture shows the seriousness of that failure. Eskom reported 329 days of load shedding, plant availability of 54.5%, diesel spend of 33 billion rand, and a loss before tax of 25.5 billion rand, while also acknowledging systemic issues, including a dysfunctional organizational culture. The core question is this: what kind of leadership system produces these outcomes? Our answer is that the physical grid became unstable because the human system governing it became unstable first. Eskom's own reporting and the record of the public inquiries point to a pattern of governance breakdown, weak internal controls, blurred accountability, procurement irregularities, and a damaged organizational culture. This is why we are treating Eskom as a leadership and culture case, not only as an engineering case. Shine's core insight is useful here. Leaders create and embed culture through what they consistently reward, tolerate, correct, and ignore. At Eskom, those signals became misaligned with the institution's mandate. Eskom is suitable because leadership trust, accountability, and psychological safety were all visibly compromised in a system-critical context. Our presentations, therefore, follows a clear logic. First, we diagnosed the leadership patterns that weakened Eskom. Second, we show why leadership awareness and mindset matter. And thirdly, we apply a practical 7-point intervention framework. Finally, we show how leadership reform improves human conditions that support sustainable performance.
The deterioration became most visible during the capture years. Public evidence on Eskom points to politically compromised decisions, improper contract changes, controversial relationships involving Takeda, Optimum, Trillion, and McKinsey, and a broader enabling environment that weakened accountability and governance. The leadership was not a once-off error. It was structural. Rapid executive turnover further weakened continuity, and strategic coherence, making Eskom more vulnerable to inference and less able to defend institutional integrity. She helps us interpret what happened when leaders permit fiduciary duty to be displaced by political or factional interests. They teach the organization what really matters. The message at Eskom was that loyalty to networks override loyalty to mandate, controls, and ethics. Once that message takes hold, culture follows. Staff learn that speaking up is risky, that challenge is unsafe, and that self-protection matters more than truth. In a utility that depends on early escalation of risk, and that is not a soft issue, it is a systemic risk. Edmonton's work on psychological safety is the right external anchor here. In a high-risk environment, organizations need people to raise concerns, challenge assumptions, and report problems early. A fear-based culture suppresses exactly those behaviors. The human result at Eskom was predictable: low trust, silence, disengagement, and the loss of competent people. That leadership damage Meshach will refrain through awareness, self-leadership, and human-centered leadership.
Eskom context is high pressure, political, and system critical. In that environment, leadership cannot be reduced to command, compliance, and crisis management. It must shape the climate in which people can speak, decide, and act. The gap on this slide is the gap between reactive, transactional leadership and human-centered, and lastly, values-based leadership. External leadership scholarship consistently shows that institutions under pressure do not recover through technical control alone. They recovered when leaders rebuild trust, clarity, and responsibility in a meaningful alignment. Awareness matters because leaders who do not understand their own impact on the human system often reinforce fear, defensiveness, and fragmentation without intending to. Eskom recovery, therefore, depends not only on new plans, but on new leadership consciousness. This brings us to the self-leadership. Goldsman emotional intelligence tradition and Mayers, Davis, and Skuman trust model point in the same direction. Leadership credibility depends not only on authority, but on self-awareness, judgment, integrity, and relational conduct. If leaders are emotionally reactive, politically driven, or morally unanchored, they can easily become transmitters of fear. But when leaders regulate themselves well, act from purpose, and model consistency, they create a condition for trust and ethical follow through. That mindset shift is essential at Eskom. It is the bridge between diagnosis and intervention, which is why Tumelo now turns to practical 7-point framework.
Thank you, Meshach. The first point in our 7-point plan is values in action. Eskom's problem was not that their values were absent on paper. The real problem was the implementation gap between the formal values that were communicated and the everyday leadership behavior that was modeled and experienced by our people. This is why the recovery process must begin with an integration of our values into the way we work. Values must be translated into daily behaviors and procurement, operational decision-making, maintenance discipline, people management, and consequence management. Performance should be judged not only by the result, but by how this result was achieved. The practical focus is then clear. We use integrity as a value to confront corruption, accountability to stabilize leadership behavior, operational excellence to improve on plant discipline and the safety of our people. Service to South Africa is used as a value to reconnect Eskom to its public mandate, and collaboration to reduce silos within the organization. This, in turn, will turn our values from slogans into operating rules that we can abide by daily. The second point in the 7-point plan is then rights and responsibilities. Eskom needs a behavioral contract that makes expectations explicit across the organization. Every right must be paired with a responsibility, and every responsibility must be reinforced by visible leadership conduct. As employees, you have the right to safety and the responsibility to follow the safety protocols that is laid out by the organization. Leaders need to live, act, and lead by example. This aligns well with Rousseau's work on the psychological contract and Bass's idea of an idealized influence. Leaders need to set standards, model them, and enforce them consistently so that accountability is experienced as fair and credible by our people, rather than selective and political. This is also where psychological safety begins to be rebuilt in practical terms. When expectations are clear, consequences are consistent, and leaders are behaviorally trustworthy, people are more willing to speak up, raise risks, and contribute honestly. Balesa will take this forward.
Third intervention is non-negotiable standards. The public record around Eskom shows a pattern in which serious ethical and governance failures were often met with weak, delayed, or absent consequence management. The response is a leadership charter that sets zero-tolerance thresholds for ethical breaches, governance failures, and abuse of authority, regardless of rank and political proximity. This must be reinforced by an independent consequence management mechanism and board-level reporting so that enforcement is visible and auditable. Kanungo and Madonka provide the key leadership idea here. Ethical leadership requires a behavioral flaw. Without an enforceable minimum standard below which no leader may operate, trust recovery remains impossible. The fourth intervention is the performance environment. Eskom's fear culture weakened its capacity to self-correct because critical concerns were often suppressed, sidelined, or delayed. The leadership task is to redesign the environment. Leaders must be trained in active listening, non-defensive response, and the protection of ethical voice. Eskom also needs protected escalation channels, trust-based accountability, and performance systems that assesses behavioral leadership indicators alongside outputs. Edmondson's contributive is decisive here. In high-risk systems, speaking up is not optional. It is part of operational reliability. The organization becomes safer when challenge, learning, and escalation are normal rather than punished. The fifth intervention is reputation. Eskom's reputational damage did not begin as a communications problem. It began as a leadership behavior problem. That means recovery must move from the inside out. Leaders must first rebuild internal credibility through visible integrity, fairness, competence, and follow-through. Employees then become genuine reputation carriers rather than reluctant representatives of an organization they do not trust. Meyer, Davis, and Schoorman help explain why. Trust is built when stakeholders repeatedly observe ability, integrity, and compassion. In other words, reputation is a lagging indicator of trustworthy leadership behavior. Tapi will take us through the next steps.
The sixth intervention is communication and learning. At Eskom, top-down and defensive communication patterns contributed to a culture of silence and reduced learning from failure. The remedy is not more messaging. It is better leadership practice. Eskom needs structured two-way forums, visible protection for whistleblowing, and ethical escalation and after-action reviews that produce learning rather than archived blame. Shine's view of learning culture is important here. Learning becomes real only when leaders model humility, invite challenges, and respond to uncomfortable information with inquiry rather than punishment. The seventh intervention is disengagement and talent retention. Silence, withdrawal, burnout, and resignation should be treated as diagnostic signals of leadership system failures, not merely as individual HR problems. This is why Eskom needs relational coaching for leaders, deliberate re-engagement mechanisms, recognition, growth pathways, and focused retention of technical and engineering talent. In Eskom's case, the loss of experienced engineers is not just a talent issue, it is an operational risk. This is also where Luthans and colleagues become useful. When hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism decline, adaptability declines with them. Eskom, therefore, needs leadership practices that restore both commitment and capability. This pictogram helps us to see the logic of the intervention. Over time, the 7-point plan rebuilds Eskom's leadership tower from the foundations upwards, and it is precisely how human systems begin to recover, which Bruwalda will now unpack through psychological safety, social capital, and psychological capital.
The 7-point plan is designed to rebuild 3 human performance conditions. First, psychological safety supports an honest voice in early escalation. Second, social capital strengthens trust, coordination, and knowledge flow across the organization. Third, psychological capital supports resilience, efficacy, hope, and optimism under pressure. The theoretical anchors align well here. Edmondson for psychological safety, Nahapit and Koshal for social capital, and Lutans and colleagues for psychological capital. Together they show why leadership and culture are not peripheral to performance. They are part of the performance system itself. At Eskom, these human conditions were damaged by fear, weak trust, silos, and disengagement. Rebuilding them is essential if technical recovery is to be sustained rather than undermined from within. This slide makes the mechanism explicit. When leadership becomes more ethical, accountable, and inclusive, the human experience of work changes. Consistent standards improve trust. A safer voice improves learning. Better relationships improve collaboration. Stronger psychological capital improves resilience. That is why culture redesign is not cosmetic. It is the mechanism through which the organization regains the ability to coordinate, adapt, and execute consistently. The intervention model is not just about fixing behavior at the top. It is about redesigning the environment in which performance becomes possible across the system.
The next question is whether this human system argument can be connected to operational outcomes. The answer is yes, but carefully. Technical and financial metrics are lagging indicators, while cultural and leadership shifts show up first in engagement, earlier escalations, stronger accountability, and better coordination. There is a practical proof of concept signal in Eskom's more recent trajectory. Eskom reported markedly improved performance in year 2025, including no load shedding for the first 6 months of that year, reduced diesel usage, better plant availability, suggesting that disciplined recovery conditions can improve outcomes. Gallup's wider engagement performance research supports this broader logic. When engagement improves, organizations tend to do better. In Eskom's case, the point is not to oversimplify causation, but to show that human system repair is necessary condition for sustainable operational recovery. If Eskom's leadership system improves, 3 longer-term outcomes become more likely. The first, higher engagement and discretionary effort. The second, collaborative accountability across functions. The third, more reliable execution because disciplined maintenance, learning, and escalation become normalized. This is the paradigm shift in our presentation. Technical performance should be read not only as an engineering outcome, but also as a lagging result of leadership design and organizational culture. When the human system stabilizes, the technical system has a far better chance of stabilizing too. That is the link Mendine now closes with.
To conclude, Eskom can be pictured as a leadership tower. In the broken state, the tower is weakened by captured appointments, weak accountability, fear, silence, and fragmentation. In that condition, every external shock travels through a fragile human system before it appears as a technical instability. In the rebuild state, the tower rests on value in action, explicit responsibilities, non-negotiable standards, a psychologically safer performance environment, stronger communication, and retained expertise. These leadership conditions make reliable execution more likely. Our final recommendation is therefore straightforward. Eskom should be treated not only as a technical turnaround project, but as a leadership and culture transformation project, integrated with operational recovery. If leadership remains unstable, performance will remain fragile. If leadership becomes intentional, accountable, and human-centered, Eskom has a stronger basis for trust, reliability, and sustained performance. Here is our recommended roadmap. Eskom rebuilds from the foundation up by making integrity the value that aligns daily behaviors, by clarifying rights and responsibilities, enforcing non-negotiable standards such as zero-tolerance thresholds for ethical breaches, and by creating psychological safety so that employees can escalate risks without fear of punishment. Because once that leadership tower is rebuilt, trust can return, performance can stabilize, and the lights can stay on. Thank you.
A question then arises as to how we can implement this into our organization. Joining us is an HR specialist who can share her insights and a practical example as to how they tackled one of these values, bringing them into action in a similar organization.
To be honest, when corruption is so deep-rooted, you need visible, notable, intentional action. Number one, you need to build trust with the staff members that are there. The staff members that want to improve Eskom for the better. The staff members that want to participate in seeing Eskom improve for the better. And one of those elements is identifying your senior leaders, your leaders that are part and parcel of this corruption, leaders that have immensely groomed this corruption into a culture of Eskom, and making sure that you make examples of them so that they exit the organization. This will then give a message to the staff, a message of this type of behavior is unacceptable. This type of behavior does not align to our values. This type of behavior will be dealt with swiftly and with intention going forward. You then make sure that anyone that is willing to come forward is protected in the organization. You make sure that people that are willing to align with the new values of the culture that you're trying to entrench in the organization are supported. Managers that are willing to work back and forth to make sure that they stabilize the culture of the organization. It's important to understand that this is not an easy act or an easy ask in terms of senior management. It will require investigations, audits, but most importantly, it will require leaders to be decisive, leaders to be strong, and leaders to lead the staff members or Eskom out of the trenches of corruption.